Welcome. I'm Beth Coulthard, PhD student at Ulster University, and this is the presentation I gave at the Ezra conference in Edinburgh. In this talk, I'm going to discuss one example of what big data and techniques associated with it can offer to social work research. First, I'll just say a few words about what we mean by big data. We are referring to the constantly increasing volume of electronically and centrally stored data. As well as the stats we're all used to, we can now access on a large scale case notes and text documents that tell the stories, strengths, and weaknesses of service users. Now, a really key point to remember is that big data is already stored and available, so we don't have focus groups to set up or questionnaires to design. So the term data mining often gets used here. Big data lives in many databases that we can aim to draw together using automation. For instance, police and prison records, when combined with social worker notes, enhances our assessments of risks to children. Now, today's awesome technology eats and digests such huge amounts of data that we don't always need to rely on samples, which can be small or unrepresentative. Some patterns can only be seen in really large data sets. And finally, we get to see how things really pan out or how people really behave, and not how they think they might or feel they should act. Okay, I'll now turn to my own study. Before I came to it, I was a children's guardian employed by CAFCAS, where my role was to represent the interests of children going through care proceedings and to help the family courts to make the best decisions for them. This study focuses on England because that's where the biggest data is to be found, and I'll come to that in a minute. It's well known that applications to place children in care have been rising significantly, both in the UK and many other countries. And the blue bars here show that for England as a whole, the family courts dealt with around 50% more applications in 2016 to 17 than they did 8 years prior to that. The reasons for this increase are for another discussion, but for our purposes here, it's interesting to look at some of the variations in different local authorities. So for instance, the blue bars here represent the national picture. However, the red shows Sunderland, where care applications rose 6 times over the same 8 years. Whereas in Haringey, care applications, shown in green, have declined over the same period, despite Haringey being the centre of the media storm surrounding the tragic death of Peter Connolly in 2008. And it's observations such as these that raise searching questions. Just what is influencing the decisions made about children in the family courts? And how can we at least work towards more equitable decision making? Minimising errors, which might be defined either as tragic failures to act or unnecessary intrusions into the lives of children and families. And can big data help us to answer any of these questions? So, where do we find big care data? A very large number of local authorities make care applications, all have their own systems and processes, and send their applications that are largely paper-based to more than 40 family courts throughout England. Although the Ministry of Justice keeps a database recording all this activity, the actual case documents are stored in paper files across the country, so not very accessible. But fortunately, because every child in proceedings has a CAFCAS guardian appointed, electronic copies of every case document find their way to CAFCAS, who do store everything in electronic form. It is this centralised national electronic resource that provides such a major opportunity for this kind of research, and indeed other researchers have come to CAFCAS for just this reason. But the project I'm involved in is trying to take things a step further, not just getting data out of databases using routine queries, but exploring also what is held in text documents, and one in particular. This is the social work evidence template, which social workers must complete at the outset of proceedings, setting out in full the reasons for the application and all their supporting evidence. These are substantial documents, frequently extending to 10,000 words or more. I'm just going to highlight two types of information that document templates can give us. Semi-structured text is found in predictable places, for instance, table cells, and can be extracted using programming techniques. For instance, where a child is living at the outset of proceedings will be an important factor for the courts to consider. However, it is not routinely recorded in any structured database. Free text is contained in several headings in the report. The bullet points you see here are just some of the areas that must be covered in this document. All factors that raise concerns for the safety and welfare of the child will be detailed and evidenced within this document. So, how can we identify which case factors are present without going down the traditional and time-consuming route of reading through each document individually? The answer lies in natural language processing, also referred to as text mining. This technique is very well established in the fields of business and social media, but also law and medicine, and to a growing extent, social work in parts of North America. A wide range of techniques of varying complexities being used, occupying teams of data scientists. This PhD project will be limited to my own skills and resources, but can still use simple but powerful techniques to highlight future research avenues. Just for this talk, I've prepared a rough and ready example. It uses a simple word count, and here the theme is substance misuse. I've selected several words which in my own experience are most often associated with this area of difficulty, one frequently encountered in parents involved in care proceedings. I've used the same technique with two other factors, mental health and domestic violence. In combination, these are the factors often considered to pose the greatest risk to children's safety. I've then run a number of the templates through a simple program that highlights the key words denoting each of the three themes, and then I've read the documents myself. The first example I'll show is the case of a mother whose older child was removed from her care, and throughout her current pregnancy, she's allegedly been spending £100 a day on Class A drugs. The second case concerns a mother with long-standing profound mental health difficulties. And the third shows a more mixed picture, one in which both parents abuse alcohol, there's violence within their current and previous relationships, and the father has attempted suicide several times. Now, in all three cases, the local authorities' applications were opposed by the parents, but granted by the courts. So the children were placed in foster care at the outset of proceedings, and the final permanent decisions were also for care orders to be made. In two of the cases, the child was placed for adoption. In these slides, I've tried to show that without knowing the individual stories, we may be able to see, over thousands of cases, patterns emerging regarding decisions that the courts are making for children. So to sum up where we've got our information from, the CAFCAS database delivers a list of relevant cases and tells us a bit about them. We can use structured queries for this, but we can also use text analysis of the local authorities' written documents to give us the case factors that influence the court's decision, whilst we can draw on the Ministry of Justice's database to tell us both what the court decided at the outset of proceedings as well as at the end of them, and get an idea how that first decision influenced the final one. We can link all those bits of data together using identifiers that are common to all databases to give us a more complete picture of the whole process for the child. Now, how do we use all this information? Well, there's a lot of work to be done on the factors we're able to find and should be looking for, how we do that, and then interpret the results. Whether, for instance, we can score a factor, say 1 to 5 for its severity, or simply use a yes-no categorical variable. We need to consider the dynamic difficulties that wax and wane within families, like substance misuse and mental health, but also static factors such as age, gender, family size, and so on. We can also explore decision making by geographical area or court or deprivation indices. The aim is to find a model that best describes how decisions are made. The model is what tells us which factors alone or in combination have the most powerful influence on decisions. Logistic regression is probably the best established and traditional mathematical technique that we can use to do this. However, big data, through the new discipline of predictive analytics, gives us a frightening number of techniques with weird and wonderful names like random forests, neural networks, all telling us that basically a computer has been trained to find the best model. Although arguably most accurate, there are difficulties using artificial intelligence in any field where processes need to be totally transparent. And finally, heuristics are a different kettle of fish. Gert Gigerenzer, who championed them most famously, argues humans don't, and indeed shouldn't, weigh and balance every bit of information. But, for instance, a social worker might say, the drugs problem is so bad, this alone makes up my mind, and nothing else matters. And indeed, some facts may well trump all others. I'll explain with an example in a minute. I'm going to turn now to how this work can help us construct decision aids. So, this one is a cut-down version of a scale developed in California. If you use logistic regression, you can establish the most important factors and give them a score. So a high score can be determined by any one of a number of factors, and you could also make deductions for areas of strength. So this is known as a compensatory tool because it weighs and balances a range of factors. In this heuristic hypothetical example, a yes-no decision is needed as to whether a child goes home or enters care. And we might say that the history of the case is such that strong arguments are needed as to why the discussion should continue. Or, if the first criteria is not met, we might continue to the next highest risk factor on the list. And again, so that if none of these criteria is met, we presume that a care order is not made. I must stress that these tools are about steering analysis and discussion according to evidence, but don't replace professional judgment. The literature is clear on that, and also that the best decisions use a bit of both. But that said, how tools and professional discretion fit together on the ground, and who holds practitioners to account, pose big challenges. In this talk, I've looked at decisions, but not outcomes. It's relatively easy to find out what shaped a decision, but less straightforward to determine whether it was the best one, because too often we just don't know how a child's life turns out when a case is closed. But bigger and joined up data should at least improve our capacity to follow up children in the longer term and build on that information. The ethical issues big data raises are humongous, because we're dealing with hugely sensitive data which can't be packaged and sent to a data scientist or routinely to several agencies. Nonetheless, service users have a right to privacy, but children also have a right to protection and to receive the best services and decisions based on best evidence. So privacy issues are huge, but they do need to be tackled. And the final point, to put it most simply, social workers didn't come to the profession to be computer scientists, whereas those data guys aren't always renowned for their empathy and intuition. Our systems, processes, and thinking in social work have got such a long way to go. And as a social worker myself, and one of the few grappling with data science, it feels like a struggle. Or, to illustrate, I reckon that to peel that data potato, today's computer scientist would use one of these. But the best way I can explain how it really feels as a social worker attempting the same task feels more like this. But hey, we're getting there. And on that point, I'll finish and say thank you for listening. Thanks to those who came to our talks at Edinburgh, and especially to those who passed me kind comments. I am the only Beth Coulthard on ResearchGate, where you can find me, and I'll be posting updates on the project, and I'd love to hear your comments.